There's been a lot of talk lately about the creation of an American nationalist party. This was brought about primarily by comments made by Michael Savage on WABC radio, in which he said that, quote, "We need a nationalist party in the United States of America." And Michael Savage is a pretty big deal, you know. He's the third most listened to talk radio personality out there. So there's a lot of people listening to him, and he's got a lot of people talking about the creation of a nationalist party. I agree with him. I think we need a nationalist party. I think the Tea Party is the organization best positioned to become that nationalistic party, or at least to push the Republicans into a situation in which they would be willing to take up the mantle of nationalism. There's four major components that I think such a nationalist party needs to address, and they're first of all tariffs. They need to cut immigration entirely, just do away with immigration at least for a few years, maybe a decade or two. They need to reduce the size of government, and they need to reinstate Christianity as the guiding ideology of the country. First issue is tariffs. I think tariffs, if you look at all the major industrialized economies of the modern day, they all rose to their preeminence on protectionist nationalistic economics. This is completely different than what we have now. The United States has trade agreements with everyone and their brother. They have trade agreements with... I'm surprised they don't have a free trade agreement with North Korea by now. They have, the World Trade Organization, the WTO, NAFTA, all of these different organizations that allow them to, just trade across borders without any sort of fees. And this has resulted in all the multinational corporations starting to manufacture all of their goods overseas, obviously, because when they can go over there and get slave labor in China, and they can produce all kinds of products for a cent an hour, for the Taiwanese or whatever to get to build their product, and they can bring it back to America and sell it for as much money as they sold it for 20 years ago when they had to make the products here. They're obviously making massive profits. And they donate a lot of money to the Democrats and the Republicans to keep this little scheme up. But it undercuts manufacturing jobs here in America, and it undermines our security because we have no resource. We don't produce anything here. We're basically at the mercy of the people who do actually produce things, like China and these other groups. You're seeing a huge outflow of wealth. Factories, investments are all being taken to made in China, made in third world countries, and it's draining the jobs and wealth from America. You wonder why everybody has to go to college nowadays? It's because there's no longer any jobs in America that don't require some sort of education in order to do, because there's no production here. There's no manufacturing. There's no jobs that people can do, without getting an elaborate education. This is largely because we've switched to a finance economy. All major modern empires, before they collapse, stop producing things and they start switching to finance economies. You saw this in Great Britain right before the British Empire sort of fell apart, where there was very little production going on in Great Britain. It was all exported to these different colonial possessions, and London became the financial center of the world. We need to get rid of that. We need to get rid of the finance economy. It's horrible. The results of it can be seen in the 2008 crisis. You've got big bankers lending out enormous amounts of money to different people, loans they can't even, the people will never be able to pay back. And we can't say that we weren't warned. I mean, I like in Mere Christianity, where C.S. Lewis has, in his chapter on social morality, talks about how one of the biggest problems that Great Britain is facing, and now obviously America, is that we allow people to make their living off lending money for profit, for interest, like banks do, banking. And the Bible, is clearly against it. The Israelites were forbidden from lending for interest in the Old Testament. The ancient Greeks also advised against it. And in C.S. Lewis' chapter, he has a couple lines on that, and it's a great introduction to one of the huge problems of the United States right now and the way that its economy works. We need to get back to a production economy, a real economy, an economy that isn't based entirely on people pushing money around and nobody really knows where it's going. But enough said about that. The second thing that the Nationalist Party, and I'm assuming that the Tea Party should take up this mantle, is to eliminate immigration. People say that immigration, America was built on immigrants, and to an extent that's true. But there's never been a period in time in history where America was completely invaded by immigrants. I mean, the period of, the Statue of Liberty and Ellis Island and all that the amount of people that came here during that time period was very small in proportion to the massive numbers of millions, tens and tens of millions of illegal immigrants just invading us from the southern border. The other problem, though, with the immigration that's currently going on is that it's all from the third world. It's all from uneducated people who have no skills. They have no job skills. I mentioned in a previous video that the Mexican immigrants, for instance, coming over, they speak Spanish, but they're not even actually literate in Spanish. They don't read Spanish. They can't write Spanish, so they have absolutely no skills, and they end up on government welfare programs. But but it needs to be eliminated. These immigrants. They're changing the cultural makeup of the country. Immigrants are supposed to come to this country or come to their place of immigration and then conform to the values and the culture of the natives. That's what happened in the 18th or 19th century when all the immigrants came from Europe. I mean, you don't see Italians speaking Italian. You don't see it. I mean, you don't see Irish speaking Gaelic. You don't see Polish people speaking, Polish or Russian, or you don't see that. I mean, there's St. Patrick's Day. I mean, sure, there's these little leftovers of Europe, from their vestiges of Europe. But, nowadays they look the same as the Anglo-Americans. They talk the same as the Anglo-Americans. They have the same values as the Anglo-Americans did when they came over. They completely assimilated more or less into the society. That is not what's happening with the Latinos. They vote in bloc for Democrats. They a lot of them refuse to speak English. They're on government programs. They're not assimilating properly. They're creating a faction. And they're not assimilating into American culture. So immigration needs to be eliminated. The flood of individuals who, don't think and act like us needs to be ended until we can properly, assimilate them. But the third major piece of, mantle that the future Nationalist Party needs to run on is they need to reduce government. Handouts need to end. The Bible says, if a man shall not work, he shall not eat. That's how it needs to be. They need to reduce military. There's absolutely no reason that we need an enormous military to continue our colossal empire around the world. We have hundreds of bases, thousands of people stationed in random places that don't even places that absolutely don't need us. Germany, for instance. Why in the world do we need all these people in Germany? I mean, there's no threat from Germany, and there's no plausible reason we would ever need them. And the government, the federal government, needs to give powers back to the state. The federal government needs to just shrink altogether. There's no reason that the federal government should have powers like health care and stuff like this. It needs to be given back to the states. Education, the federal government's been bribing states to to do different educational programs. That needs to end. The states need to take control of their own affairs. But the fourth and most important, probably, that this nationalist party needs to advocate is that Christianity needs to be proclaimed the national religion. I know that sounds a little extreme, but it was always assumed that Christianity would be the guiding ideology of the country for 230 years, maybe 200 years, until the 60s. And it needs to just be proclaimed the national religion. Its values need to dominate. Its core principles are the ones which our founding fathers based the Constitution on. Every single founding father was a Christian at the time of the Constitution signing. There's some dispute about whether Thomas Jefferson remained a Christian for the rest of his life, but that's irrelevant. The point is that it was always a Christian nation founded on Christian values. That needs to be firmly established. And how can we expect God to bless us if we do not follow Him? But there is, I suppose, a fifth platform that needs to be mentioned, and that's that English needs to also be established as the national language. There is no reason that Spanish or any of these other languages, we should have to print materials and road signs and all this other nonsense in these other languages. I shouldn't have to hit one when I'm, calling somebody or, hitting something at the ATM to get English. It should just be there, and everybody who doesn't speak English should have to learn it. And we shouldn't allow immigrants that don't speak English. But those are the basic, 5 points that I would lay out for a nationalist party, and I think the Tea Party should take up the responsibility of becoming the new American nationalist party. And I hope that they will defend the interests of the country and, restore America to its glory days, so to speak.